Well, good afternoon. My name is Sanne Rovers, and in this presentation, I would like to tell you something about the research I will be conducting here at the Faculty of Health, Medicine and Life Sciences of Maastricht University. In this presentation, I will discuss the following. First, I will tell you something about myself, then I will give a general introduction describing the theoretical background and the problem statements associated with the studies. And this will be followed by an overview of the overall research project, in which both the outline of the project and the research questions will be introduced. And finally, I will give a more detailed description of the first study I plan to conduct, describing the outline and the methods. In this project, I am supervised by Jeroen van Merrienboer, Hans Zavelberg, and Geraldine Klarebout. First, something about myself. Before coming to Maastricht University, I studied developmental psychology at Leiden University. Throughout my life, I have spent most of my free time participating in theater groups. I recently took up running, hoping to someday reach a 10-mile distance. And finally, I like photography, which I like to combine with my passion for traveling. Now about the study. As we know, the PBL problem-based learning process at Maastricht University consists of 7 steps, which I have outlined in this figure. And after having been successfully applied for decades at the university, the effectiveness of the approach seems to be diminishing, leading some research to speak of an erosion of the approach. One of the reasons for this decrease in effectiveness might be ineffective self-study among students, as research has found that students have become increasingly less engaged in self-study. In this regard, given the enormous increase of available information in recent years, it might be important to stress self-regulated learning among students. In self-regulated learning, students are assumed to monitor and control their own learning process in order to achieve a specific learning goal. We will focus on 2 variables that might affect self-regulated learning. First of all, many students are not used to the problem-based approach, as it is different from what they have become accustomed to during high school. And as students prefer to work according to their own learning habits, this discrepancy may cause them to fall back on non-problem-based approaches during the self-study phase. So aligning students' perceptions and expectations of their learning environment to those of the faculty might therefore lead to an increase in self-regulated learning, as this understanding might prevent students from falling back on the non-problem-based strategies. And second, self-regulated learning might be enhanced by supporting or modeling self-regulated learning strategies, which is also known as scaffolding. And these effects might be influenced by study year, as research has shown that study habits become more stable and possibly also more effective as students acquire more practice and positive experiences with the study habits. This slide presents a schematic overview of the overall research project with independent variables represented in rectangles and the dependent variables represented in the circles. The first study will focus on the measurement of self-regulated learning and the measurement of students' perceptions and expectations about their learning environment. The research questions for this study are: can self-regulated learning be measured using an electronic tool for information processing? Can types of students be identified based on their use of this electronic tool and based on their expectations and perceptions about their learning environment? And if so, are these patterns predictive of study success? We expect self-regulated learning to be influenced by both study year and the perceptions and expectations of the students, and self-regulated learning is expected to influence effective self-study, which in turn is expected to influence academic performance. Participants in this study will be 150 students from the Faculty of Health, Medicine and Life Sciences. And as we expect to see an effective study year, we will study 50 students from each bachelor year. Students' perceptions and expectations regarding their learning environment will be measured using the perceptions and expectations about college questionnaire, also known as the PEAK. And self-regulated learning will be measured by tracking students' activity in a software program called nStudy. And for comparison, student self-regulated learning activity will be measured in an offline way using the Motivated Strategies for Learning questionnaire, or the MSLQ. Academic performance will be measured using post-block exam scores. And finally, we will use focus groups to inquire about students' learning behavior. Specifically, we want to know how students use the end-study environment, how they use it during self-study, and what they do when they run into problems. In Study 2 and 3, we will focus on specific interventions to increase self-regulated learning among first-year students, focusing in Study 2 on the explicitation and alignment of students' perceptions and expectations regarding their learning environment with those of the faculty. And in Study 3, we will look at providing adaptive scaffolding in an online learning environment. The final study takes everything together and will focus on how we can successfully implement the interventions and fine-tune the learning environment. As I mentioned earlier, we will use a new software program called N-Study to measure self-regulated learning. N-Study is a software program that can be used by students to structure their online learning. When studying, students can create highlights, notes, quotes, and labels according to preset templates. They can create an index or glossary and collaborate with each other using a chat function called the Hub. For every artifact that students create in the online learning environment, a node is created in a concept map, and students can also modify these concept maps or create their own. The N-Study environment creates time-stamped log data which can be used to find indications of self-regulated learning among students. Specifically, we will look for students' monitoring of their progress on their learning issues using judgment of learning questions. We will look for students' deep learning strategies by looking at their activity on concept maps. And we will see whether students have independently searched for literature by asking them to upload a reference list and compare these to the lists of other students. And at a later stage, N-Study can also be used to provide scaffolding of self-regulated learning strategies to the students. This is my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to welcome questions or suggestions.